From the moment you step off the plane, it's like you're walking into a world that doesn't quite recognize you. The weight of your gear is gone, but the invisible weight of your experiences follows you. Unseen, unacknowledged, and strangely heavier than the equipment you once carried. You remember your first steps back into civilian life, the feeling of trying to fit into a world that didn't quite know how to see you anymore. They looked down on your combat scars as though they were something to be ashamed of, because you were supposed to be the warrior, not the wounded. You were supposed to come back with pride, but instead, all you could hear were the whispers. The world, it seemed, had forgotten the cost of your service. But those scars, they weren't just physical. Beneath the surface, there were layers of trauma and stories of battles fought far away, ones that others couldn't begin to understand. It wasn't just the marks on your body. It was the marks they left on your mind, on your heart. And no matter how much you tried to explain, no one would truly understand. You had returned, but something in you had broken. Not in the way that people might think, but in a way that was almost harder to heal from. When you look into the mirror, the reflection staring back at you isn't quite the same person who left. Her eyes tell the story, the kind of story no one wants to hear. The scars on her body tell another, the kind people try to avoid. But the most painful scar? It's the one you carry inside. The one no one ever asks about. The world sees your battle wounds, but they don't see the silent war still raging inside you. They don't know that even after returning home, you're still fighting every single day. So how do you heal from that? You take a deep breath as you walk into the room, your boots clicking against the hard floor. The eyes of the people in the room fall on you, and you feel the weight of their gaze like a physical pressure. It's not outright hostility, but it's not the welcome you imagined either. They glance at your scars, your face, your arms, the remnants of the battles you fought, and then quickly look away. Some of them try to act like it doesn't bother them, but you know it does. You can feel the unspoken questions in the air. What happened to her? Was she really cut out for this? Could she handle it? And you're left with that all too familiar feeling, like you're an outsider, like you don't truly belong. You always imagined that returning home would be a time to rest, to reflect, to heal. But the stares, the sideways glances, the silent judgment, each one feels like another weight pressing down on your shoulders. The war you fought in wasn't just fought on foreign soil. It's right here, in the room, in the silence that stretches too long. The space between you and the others grows, and you feel the distance. It's not the physical distance, it's the emotional one. They don't understand. They can't. The world doesn't know what it's like to leave a war and return as someone different, someone who has seen things that can't be unseen. The scars on your skin tell part of the story, but there's so much more beneath the surface. And each time someone looks away, you're reminded of how little they truly grasp the weight of what you've carried. You wonder if they even care to know. You try to push it aside. Tell yourself it doesn't matter. But it does. It always does. Because it's not just the physical scars they see, it's the way they treat you differently now, like you're broken or somehow less than you were before. You want to scream to make them understand, but you keep it in. You always do. It's not that they're cruel, it's just that they don't know what it's like to be you. And then there's the pain that's not even about what they say, but about what they don't say. The silence is the hardest part. No one talks about what it means to be a female veteran. No one talks about the unique challenges you face when your service is dismissed or forgotten. The world wants to paint soldiers as heroes, but it doesn't want to acknowledge the real consequences of war, especially for women. You begin to wonder, why aren't we seen as warriors too? Why do we have to fight to prove we belong? The weight of their expectations was heavy. You tried to move past it, tried to convince yourself that it didn't matter. But the truth kept clawing at the back of your mind. You had been abandoned by the very system you gave everything for. You remember those first few months home when you were just trying to navigate the minefield of well-meaning but clueless advice, when you were searching for someone to understand what you were going through. But the more you looked for answers, the more it felt like the world had forgotten about you. The government gave you a checklist, a list of benefits you were entitled to, but none of it truly helped. None of it healed the scars you couldn't see, the ones that festered in your mind. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You fought for this country, bled for this country, and this was what you came home to. A system that didn't even recognize you fully. The paperwork never stopped. The phone calls never ended. And the battle continued in forms and red tape. But what about your mental health? What about the sense of isolation that was eating away at you? Where was the support for that? The military had prepared you for it, but no one had prepared you for what came after. There was no roadmap for dealing with the psychological scars, the invisible wounds that no one else could see. How could they understand when they didn't even know what questions to ask? Your friends back home seemed to get it, or at least they pretended to. They'd nod sympathetically, tell you they were glad you were home, but the underlying tension was always there. They weren't sure what to say. They weren't sure how to act. Some of them even distanced themselves, and that was almost worse than the staring. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who didn't understand, that was the real challenge. No one knew how to deal with you. No one knew how to talk about your scars. But there was one thing that was undeniable. You weren't alone in this. Slowly, you began to connect with others who shared your experience. The social media groups, the veteran support circles, they became your lifeline. Women like you, who had faced the same judgment, the same silence, the same rejection. They too had come back from war with scars that ran deeper than skin. But together, you found strength. The more you listened to their stories, the more you realized that your scars didn't define you. They were a part of your journey, yes, but they didn't control you. You began to find solace in knowing that you weren't the only one, and in that, you started to heal. But healing wasn't about ignoring the pain. It was about acknowledging it. You needed to speak up, to confront the unspoken, and most importantly, to stop hiding your scars. You weren't weak. You were stronger than anyone could understand. And that was what you started to own. For the first time in a long time, you allowed yourself to see the value in the struggle, the growth that came from facing the harsh realities of your past. You stopped pretending it was okay and started accepting that it wasn't. That was the key to moving forward. Acceptance, not denial. Still, even in this newfound strength, there were moments when the old doubts crept in. What would the world say if they knew the whole truth? Would they still see you as the hero you once thought you were? Or would they just see the broken parts of you, the parts that no one else could fix? You wondered if anyone would ever really get it, if they would ever really understand the depth of what you had endured. But then you realized something profound. It didn't matter if they understood or not. What mattered was that you understood. You were in control now, and in that, you found peace. The more you thought about it, the more you realized that the healing process was never meant to be a solo journey. Healing didn't happen in isolation. It was a community effort, one built on shared understanding and mutual support. And in truth, the world never really did get it. Not fully, not completely. It wasn't just about the government's failures to support women veterans. It was about the way society looked at them. About how women like you, who fought, bled, and sacrificed, were often ignored or minimized. But this silence was something you couldn't accept anymore. At some point, you realized that the war wasn't over just because you had come home. Sure, you no longer had to face the enemy on the battlefield, but now you were fighting a different kind of battle, a fight for your own dignity. And it was a fight you weren't going to lose. Slowly, it dawned on you that your scars, the very things everyone else saw as a mark of weakness, were actually your strength. They were proof of everything you had endured and survived. They were a testament to your resilience, not your brokenness. What people didn't understand was that you weren't just a victim of war. You were a survivor, and that survivor was determined to make herself heard. This realization didn't come overnight. It didn't happen in a single moment. It was a slow, sometimes painful process. But eventually, you found yourself standing up for yourself, and standing up for the countless other women who had returned home just like you, only to be forgotten by the very system they had sacrificed so much for. You weren't just a statistic. You weren't just another female veteran who had fought in the shadows, unnoticed, unheard. You were a warrior, and your scars were part of that story. The emotional toll of combat might never go away, but you had learned that you didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The sisterhood that formed among women veterans became your safe space. You shared your stories, those unspoken, buried experiences, with one another, and in doing so, you began to reclaim your power. But that power didn't come from ignoring the pain or pretending it wasn't there. It came from facing it. And perhaps more importantly, it came from sharing it with others who understood. There was something deeply empowering about saying, "This is my story," and having people around you say, "I get it. I've been there too." You began to do things you never thought you could, things you'd never have considered when you first returned home. You started to speak out about the struggles women veterans faced. You shared your own experiences with mental health, with the silent pain of adjusting to life after war, and with the need for better support systems. You joined veteran advocacy groups, and your voice became a beacon for others who were still too afraid to speak. The more you opened up, the more you realized that healing wasn't just about the individual. It was about the collective. In your own way, you started to rewrite the narrative around what it meant to be a female veteran. You were no longer just the woman with scars. You were the woman who had come through it and was determined to make sure the world saw your value. The scars that had once been a source of shame, of silence, of isolation had become your message. You wore them proudly, not as a symbol of what you had lost, but of what you had gained. Strength, courage, resilience. And the world, as it turns out, wasn't as indifferent as you thought. Slowly, the conversation started to change. More people began to recognize the unique challenges faced by female veterans. The media started to take notice. Social media platforms, once just a place for sharing photos of vacation destinations or family milestones, became forums for veterans to speak up, share their stories, and demand change. You began to see more women standing up, no longer hiding their scars, but wearing them as badges of honor. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, you felt like you were part of something bigger than yourself. The twist? The same system that had dismissed you, that had looked down on you, now had no choice but to listen. With the voices of women like you rising in unison, change was inevitable. The fight had started, and it had been fought not in the shadows of war, but in the light of a new movement for recognition, healing, and respect. You begin to see it more clearly now. The fight has taken a new form. It's no longer about asking for help, hoping for understanding, or waiting for the system to give you a seat at the table. It's about demanding that seat. The transition has been slow, but it's unmistakable. You and the countless other women who have walked this same path have started to take control of the narrative. In ways that might seem small at first, but in the grander scheme of things, these are the kinds of moments that change everything. You started out quietly, almost reluctantly, but now you're more vocal than ever. You've become part of a movement, a group of women veterans who are no longer willing to let their stories be swept under the rug. You realize that healing doesn't just happen in silence. It happens when you stand up, speak out, and let the world know that your journey matters. And for the first time in a long time, you find yourself feeling heard. People are listening now. They're paying attention to what you have to say. Veteran organizations, once reluctant to address the issues that uniquely affected women, are finally beginning to do so. Their inclusion efforts are getting better, but they still have a long way to go. You and the women like you are helping to lead that charge. You push back against stereotypes, against the cultural expectations of what a veteran is supposed to look like. And you do so with pride. Your scars, the ones they once looked down on, are now your strength. They are your story. They are the reason you fight. And then something shifts again. It's not just about your individual journey anymore. You realize that your scars, your struggles, your voice, they've become the voice of something much bigger. You are a part of a community that is fighting not just for recognition, but for the respect you deserve. Women veterans like you have long been fighting for the acknowledgement that they have earned. It hasn't come easily, and it certainly hasn't come quickly, but it is coming. And it's coming because of women like you, who have chosen to rise above the silence and speak their truth. But this new visibility doesn't come without its challenges. There are still those who don't understand, who still look down on you because of your scars. There are still institutions, both governmental and societal, that refuse to change at the pace needed. The fight continues in many forms. Sometimes it's in the hallways of Congress. Other times it's in the hospitals where women veterans are still fighting to get the care they need. But now you're not alone. You're part of a coalition that is challenging the system, challenging the prejudices, and fighting for a place at the table. As the movement grows, you start to see more women who were once afraid to speak out now joining the chorus. Their voices, once silent, now echo in every corner of the country. Together, you've turned the conversation from one of silence and isolation into one of strength and solidarity. The world is finally starting to hear what you've known all along, that your scars don't define you as weak, that they don't make you any less of a warrior. They make you a symbol of survival, of resilience, and of the will to move forward no matter the cost. As the voices of women veterans continue to rise, more of the public begins to understand the complexity of your journey. They start to see that veterans are not one-size-fits-all. They're individuals with unique experiences, and they've come back to contribute to society in ways that deserve respect. You feel a deep sense of pride when you see the change happening, when you see other women who were once ashamed of their scars now standing tall, speaking out, and sharing their stories with the world. You're witnessing something profound. The shift from being silenced to being heard. But it's still not enough. The change you seek won't happen overnight. But each step you take, each voice you raise, brings the world one step closer to the recognition you deserve. And the more women like you speak up, the more the public starts to understand the true cost of war, not just in terms of lives lost, but in the scars carried home, unseen by most. There's a long road ahead, but every day, more and more veterans are reclaiming their dignity and their strength, one story at a time. The most significant shift comes when you realize that it's not just about your own healing. It's about creating a ripple effect, one that can extend to generations of women who will follow in your footsteps. The work you're doing today is going to have an impact far beyond your own experience. You've opened the door for other women to step through, to speak their truth, and to be heard in ways that were once impossible. You never could have imagined it would come to this. That your scars, once a source of shame and silence, would become a powerful tool for change. That your personal pain, your personal journey, would inspire others to heal, to speak, and to take their place in the conversation. You've not just reclaimed your story, you've helped reshape the way the world views women veterans. And in doing so, you've created something that will continue to evolve long after you've gone. And now, as you stand on the stage, you feel something you never thought you'd experience. Pride. Not the kind of pride that comes from what you accomplished in battle or from the medals on your chest, but the kind of pride that comes from knowing you've helped rewrite the narrative for women veterans everywhere. The microphone feels heavier than any weapon you've ever carried, but in your hand, it's your tool, your weapon now. A weapon of truth, of empowerment, of solidarity. And as you address the crowd, your voice doesn't shake. Your words come out with confidence because you know that the journey to this moment wasn't just yours. It belongs to every woman who has ever faced the world after returning home with scars no one could see. You begin to speak, and your words, once hesitant and guarded, now flow freely, a testament to the resilience you've cultivated over the years. You don't just speak for yourself anymore. You speak for all the women who have walked the path you've walked, the ones who came before you, and the ones who will come after you. Each word carries the weight of their stories, their struggles, their victories. The crowd listens intently, but you know the true impact is beyond this room. It's in the conversations that will happen after you leave, in the ripple effect that your courage has set into motion. But as the applause rings in your ears, you can't help but think about the journey that got you here. The struggle to be heard, the fight to be seen, the battle against the assumption that women veterans somehow matter less, that our scars somehow aren't as significant. For so long, you were invisible. But today, you are not. Today you are a leader, a voice for the voiceless, an example of what it means to fight, not just for recognition, but for the respect that every soldier, male or female, deserves. You think about all the women who are still out there, still fighting silently, still carrying the weight of their invisible wounds without anyone to speak for them. You think about them, and you promise yourself that this fight will never stop, that their stories will never be forgotten. It's surreal, isn't it? The way things have shifted, the way the world is finally beginning to understand. You never expected to be here. You never imagined that the scars you once thought were marks of shame would turn into symbols of strength. But here you are, standing tall, speaking loud, and being heard. You've made it your mission to ensure that no other woman veteran ever has to feel invisible again, that no other woman will be forced to hide her scars in shame. You've become an advocate, not just for yourself, but for a whole generation of women who are too often ignored. Your journey hasn't been easy, and you know it won't be over anytime soon. But today, right now, you know you've taken a huge step toward healing. Not just for yourself, but for others. The fight for recognition is far from over, but you're no longer fighting alone. You're leading a charge, and with every woman who joins the movement, with every story that's shared, the world begins to see the truth. The truth about the invisible scars that veterans carry. The truth about the strength of women who serve. And the truth about the resilience of a community that has long been overlooked. As you leave the stage, there's no feeling of triumph, not in the traditional sense. The battle isn't won yet, and there's still much to be done. But you know you've done something monumental. You've taken a scar, one that once felt like a burden, and turned it into a banner of hope, of solidarity, of change. And that banner, will continue to wave as more women step forward, as more voices rise, as more stories are told. You look around and see women, veterans, standing taller than they ever have before. They stand with you now, not as the broken or the forgotten, but as warriors in their own right. The room isn't just filled with people. It's filled with the strength of every woman who has ever served. Every woman who has ever had to fight to be seen. And in that moment you realize something. This is bigger than you. This is about all of us. This is about changing how the world sees women veterans, how we see ourselves, and how we embrace our scars, not as marks of weakness, but as symbols of survival. And as you walk off that stage, you don't feel any fear. Instead, you feel something you've been searching for all this time: peace. Because in that moment, you've done the one thing you thought would be impossible. You've made your voice heard. And in doing so, you've shown the world that women veterans are not invisible. They are here, they are strong, and they will never again be silenced.